On October 16, 1969, Jerry Michael Williams, also known as Mike, was born. He was raised in Bradfordville, Florida, alongside his mother Cheryl, a daycare provider, his older brother Nick, and his father, a Greyhound bus driver. Also, his parents were adamant that their boys receive a top-notch education. All the opportunities in life that they could provide for them, that is what they wanted. In order to pay for both boys' attendance at North Florida Christian School, they saved their money. Additionally, the two youngsters were hired to work evenings at the grocery, so that kids may also assist their parents somewhat. Mike excelled academically as well. He received high marks. He presided over the student council. He was a football player. He belonged to school organizations. Additionally, when he was 15 years old, he met Denise Merrill, the girl Mike's family adored and who would become his future wife. They simply believed that their union was ideal. At school, he made nice friends as well. In grade 9, he made the acquaintance of Brian Winchester, who would later become his best friend. Brian also met Catherine, his future wife, at school. They eventually grew close to one another as friends. At the age of 15, Mike also developed a passion for duck hunting, which he hopes to pursue throughout his life. He continued his education by attending Florida State University to study urban planning and political science. He was employed by a property appraisal company before he had even graduated, and he was very successful there. Given that he was regarded as an extremely diligent worker, it seems likely that he would have succeeded in any field he chose. Mark was described as the hardest working man he had ever encountered by the proprietor of the property evaluation company he worked for. Following their marriage in 1994, Mike and Denise purchased a home on Centennial Oak Circle in Tallahassee. They then became parents to a kid together in 1999. But after they had a daughter, Denise left her work as an accountant to raise their child at home, something she was able to do because Mike was financially secure at the time. He was making about $200,000 a year by 1999. Thus, the excellent income is clearly sufficient to sustain the entire family, with Denise staying at home to care for their kid. However, he put in a lot of labor to earn this money. He would leave work, go grocery shopping, cook for Denise and their daughter, and then return to work after they had dinner together. When he found time for his interests, he continued to go duck hunting with friends, and, if possible, he spent time with the same group of friends with whom he had been close since high school. To be honest with you, Brian Winchester, his wife Kathy, and Denise were a group of four that kind of led parallel lives. For example, Brian and Kathy were married about the same time that Mark Anthony purchased a home and had a child. They so resembled living life together quite a bit. Additionally, they were really close. They used to go on double dates, see movies together, and engage in similar activities. Before December 16, 2000. Mike is currently 31 years old and appears to be in the prime of his life. He has a fantastic job that pays well and wonderful pals. He is a contented husband and father who adores his 19-month-old daughter and his lovely wife. In addition, he had recently informed his family that he and Denise were planning to try for a second child and that their 6th wedding anniversary was approaching. In order to celebrate that fight before they went, they had reserved a bed and breakfast for the weekend. Mike made the decision to go duck hunting that morning on the day they were leaving. I don't know much about duck hunting, so I went super early in the morning, like before dawn, but after doing some research, I found out that it has a very limited season and that you could only actually go on certain dates. He therefore really just attempted to go whenever he could, taking advantage of any opportunity to do so. He so departs that morning, December 16th, well before dawn, grabs his bar, and travels to Lake Seminole, a massive reservoir located roughly 50 miles or 80 kilometers from Tallahassee, and he was never seen again after leaving. He didn't return home. He and Denise were obviously supposed to be leaving that day on their anniversary trip. She then attempts to phone him. She never manages to contact him and receives no response from him. He would never be late, and he would never be late without phoning her to let her know, so this was really out of character for him. She was also aware of how excited he was about this anniversary vacation. Thus, she did not feel well about the situation as a whole. She was going crazy. When she called her father, Warren, they headed straight to Lake Seminole and rounded up some friends and relatives to go seek for Mike. Warren, Denise's father, also contacted Brian while he was there and observed that he and his father had come out to aid in the search, which was very beneficial because Brian and Mike used to go duck hunting together. Furthermore, Lake Seminole covered an enormous 37,000 acres. Thus, having Brian there, who had gone duck hunting with Mike and knew the locations they would hunt in, was tremendously beneficial in helping to focus the search. Warren, Denise's father, also gave a call to the FWC, or Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They therefore arrived to assist as well. In addition, they managed to recruit deputies from the Jackson County Sheriff's Department to assist in the Mike hunt. On the first day, the search was not particularly long. Similar to that evening, the storm was blowing at the time. It was pouring, very windy, and nobody would be able to find anything searching under those circumstances. So they decided to put off the search for a bit. However, as soon as they were able to return to the area to search, it was at 2:30 a.m., the following morning, when Brian and his father went hunting around this lake, which is known as Stump Field. And the reason it's named Stump Field is that, well, imagine a bunch of tree stumps there, all covered in weeds. And at 2:30 in the morning, they discovered my expert while they were scouring the western portion of Stump Field. They discovered his Ford Bronco 70 meters distant from where it was on this muddy bank. Mike wasn't visible in the car, nor did it indicate his location, and with the boat, it was somewhat the same story. However, they did discover all of his hunting gear inside the boat, such as his shotgun, life jacket, and duck decoys. It didn't appear like he was mid-hunt or anything, though, because his shotgun was still in the case and the boat was clear of any dirt. When he'd lost contact with the boat, he was probably wearing waders when he got lost from the boat, because his birds were nowhere to be seen on the bar. White is essentially the spirit-type stuff generally. It's as if I am the bird in its entirety. Because they are waterproof, it may be difficult to take them off if they fill with water. Additionally, because they are nearly full of water, they may make you feel heavy. Thus, if you wear them and find yourself in an unfavorable scenario, they could just draw you down and potentially drown you. It appears possible that it split from the boat while it was still in operation because the engine was still running when it was discovered. And because of this, detectives surmised that Mike might have gone too far while still wearing his whites, perhaps striking a tree root or something. He was wearing white, so even though the stump field was only 8 to 12 feet deep, they might have easily filled with water and dragged him to the bottom, but he was unable to remove them. He drowned as a result, and the boat, continued on without him till it struck that muddy bank. After that, things came to an end. Armed with this knowledge, FWC officers set out to find Mike in the stump field. They used boats equipped with these long poles to search for any evidence of Mike or his waders in the water, breaking down every 6 to 8 inches in stump fields. In order to find any movement beneath the sea, they would also employ underwater cameras. They employed cadaver dogs and head divers. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft were flying overhead, searching for any clues that would indicate he survived the drowning or that his body floated to the surface. They still believe that Mike is still alive, and that they may be able to see him in the sky, There were also a ton of folks there on foot. Friends, family volunteers, FWC members, and sheriff's office deputies were all out looking for Mike. It was becoming more and more apparent to all of us that this was more of a recovery mission as the days passed. Rather than hoping to discover Mike alive, they were searching for Mark's body. When a person drowns, their body usually rises to the surface as it breaks down. And FWC members mentioned that occasionally in these bitterly cold temperatures, it's December because it was so cold outside. Therefore, it may take up to 7 days for a person's body to emerge in these bitterly cold temperatures. However, after 7 days, by Christmas Day, there was still no evidence of Mike, his corpse, his waders, or anything at all. Additionally, the search was reduced to 1 FWC officer and 1 overhead fly every day. Naturally, friends and family were still out there trying to find him. However, the formal search was much reduced. 2 days later, on December 27th, the FWC officer went to show Mike's wife Denise the camouflage hunting hat he had discovered. Denise added that it appeared to be one that Mike had earned. However, following a thorough examination of the region, they discovered nothing further and concluded that it could not be proven to be related to Mike. Cheryl, Mike's mother, contracted for a private search and rescue team to investigate the whole region in late January. However, they came up empty again. The most absurd thing about this is that there have only ever been 80 drownings in Seminole, and each and every one of them was prevented. Recuperated, the body took a few days, maybe a week. Therefore, Mike would be the first drowning victim in Lake Seminole whose corpse has not been found. Because this is Florida, after all, detectives devised a different theory. Perhaps he did drown, but was consumed by alligators. There are a lot of alligators. Several of the early searchers reported seeing several of them when they were out there seeking. Everyone knows the lake is full of alligators, one FWC member stated. You search for solutions. Why is the body nowhere to be found? It's peaceful with the wildlife around, according to the CEO of a private search company. My assumption is that the alligators had severed the victims' bodies and hidden the remains somewhere we would not be able to locate them. This is the story that eventually spread among the public. Mike drowned and his remains were devoured by an alligator. As a result, his body was never found, unlike the bodies of all the other victims of Lake Seminole. However, because this is what the public and investigators thought also occurred on February 11, 2001, the search for Mike's remains was canceled outright. By now, he had been missing for 44 days. Additionally, officers had searched a 10-acre area of Lake Seminole for 735 man-hours. Months passed with no definitive information as to what had happened to Mike, so my ex-wife, Denise, set up a memorial service for the day after the search was formally canceled. Given the peculiar circumstances surrounding his disappearance and the absence of a body, many people started to wonder if he may not have drowned. Perhaps he did stage his own demise. According to several law enforcement officials, this is the case. Many people in the area think that this is the case. Because everything was so strange, even Mike's mother, Cheryl, considered the possibility. Potential. Mike seldom ever goes hunting by himself. He nearly always goes hunting with a friend. Consequently, the one occasion he travels alone is a few hours before he is scheduled to depart for his anniversary trip, and with that, he simply disappears. Not a sign of him. According to his mother, Cheryl, he had expressed to her recently that he would like to obtain $50,000 and take a year off from work. However, there was also a lot about him pretending to be dead that didn't make sense. He cherished his daughter above anything else, based on what his family and friends say. All of his life was simply hers. He would never just up and leave her, therefore. Additionally, he had just recently announced to his family that he and Denise intended to begin trying for another child. Why then would they organize these events? And after telling his entire family, he simply walks away. There was no way in which he would abandon his mother and intentionally give her further suffering, especially when his father had also lately died away. In addition, he had many intriguing projects in the works. He was booked on a Hawaiian cruise. He was heading to Jamaica for a work trip. Because of everything, his mother Cheryl began to wonder if he had really faked his own death and vanished or not. Perhaps something darker occurred. And then, in June 2001, less than 6 months after Mike vanished, a local fisherman discovered Mike's white body floating in a stump field in Lake Seminole. Additionally, this fisherman knew Mike's parents. He then alerted the FWC right away, and they arrived at Stump Field to remove the white object as well as check the surrounding area for any more clues that could have surfaced. Additionally, they brought some Sheriff's Department deputies within the existing structure. In addition to discovering shotgun casings, they also discovered hunting lessons belonging to Mike Williams, complete with his signature and photo, proving that these waders were, in fact, his. Mike's hunting jacket was also found when divers were looking through the sludge at the bottom of the lake for Stump Field 2 days later. Additionally, a little flashlight was found within one of the hunting jacket's pockets. And while a 44-day comprehensive search was carried out immediately after Mark's abduction, it was peculiar that this materialized 6 months after his absence. Nevertheless, the finding of these objects confirmed the hypothesis that Mike had perished in the lake there. Even though the waders, hunting jacket, and flashlight were purportedly in this lake for the previous 6 months, they were all in excellent shape. Human DNA was not present. These white ones serve as a reminder that Mark has worn them before. Additionally, none of these items had any park marks, even though investigators had used these pointing sticks every 6 to 8 inches to search the whole Stump Field parking area for any indication of a mark on any of these waders. When we found marks on them, they weren't from park holes or other animals. Instead, these were alligator tooth marks. Indeed, an expert did mention that alligators may be really gentle. Thus, it's conceivable that the alligator stole his corpse from the white area without leaving any evidence of his teeth, then carried it to a different location for consumption. But why is an alligator acting in such a manner? Like, why is the steward being gently undressed by an alligator and then his body being taken away to somewhere else? I just can't think, you know? Alligators, in my opinion, aren't accomplishing all that. Furthermore, 34 weeks after the discovery of the hunting jacket and waders, a judge actually granted Denise Williams, Mike's wife, petition to have Mike officially declared dead, with accidental drowning given as the official cause of death. This raises questions about why the white people were not discovered during the lengthy 44-day search for Mike, which involved divers in the water camera and poking holes every 6 to 8 inches. In Florida, if there was no body or no evidence that the individual had committed no crimes, it usually took 5 years for a person to be deemed legally deceased. However, I suppose the finding of his hunting jacket and waders was sufficient evidence that Mike had suffered a fatal injury. Mom Cheryl was not pleased with this decision by March, as she didn't think it was an accident. She didn't think he drowned by accident. She found the entire event to be somewhat strange. She was too poor to hire a private investigator. She ultimately decided to look into this situation on her own. And she documented everything that did not add up in this case in a 27-page dossier. A few of the points she made in this document were silent. The undeveloped spot of muck where Bronco's boat was discovered was likely where he would have lowered it into the lake, yet there were completed concrete launches not far away. However, he had a history of using the storm. The night after he went missing, the storm produced westerly winds that were supposed to blow the abandoned, unmoored boat across the lake and to the Georgia side. When the boat was found there, the gas tank was full, even though the engine was off, as stated by the producer. Investigators have argued that if the engine had been operating when Williams supposedly fell out of the boat, it should have continued to spin in circles until its gasoline ran out. She also mentioned how Mark hardly ever goes hunting by himself. It seems unusual, to put it mildly, that he would go hunting by himself on the day he vanished. She continued to refute the alligator notion after that. It was therefore approximately 55 degrees Fahrenheit, or 13 degrees Celsius, during the daytime when Mark vanished and throughout the subsequent searches. And the lows at night were below freezing. Consequently, there were nights when the temperature dropped as low as 19 degrees Fahrenheit, or almost -7 degrees Celsius. According to a local herpetologist, it is quite unlikely that an alligator would have been active under those circumstances, especially with the temperatures so low. They are only keeping their body temperature steady. An alligator needs a temperature of 58 degrees to show any interest in eating. According to a different investigator working the case, an alligator would have left something behind if it had, quote, disregarded every known gator habit and eaten Mike. At this point in time, all the alligators in this area were very small, right? For an alligator, small. Therefore, it is just not possible that they could have eaten Mike and not left even the slightest trace of him. They would have eaten the 5'10" PS170 guy. The lack of bite or tooth marks, as well as any other type of damage, further casts doubt on the alligator theory. They're not sleazy, despite spending nearly half a year in this murky lake. Furthermore, there was the question of why Mike would have worn these waders in the first place, given that one of his frequent hunting partners said that Mike had gone hunting with this friend as recently as 1 week before to his disappearance. And according to this acquaintance, Mike was extremely cautious and focused only on his safety. To ensure that his guns were never in his home around his daughter, he kept them at work. He exercised extreme caution. Until the time came for him to stop, get out of the boat, and go hunting, he would never put on his waders. When he was merely operating the boat, he would never wear them. Additionally, this was a standard safety procedure meant to prevent the precise kind of mishap that the investigators thought Mike had experienced. As much as he preached it to me, my guy said, why would he be driving the boat in his white suit? Cheryl then sent this 27-page paper, including all of this information to different law enforcement organizations, pleading with them to take another look at Mike's case. She sent them a letter. She gave them a call. She worked really hard at what she did. However, no one paid attention to her over the years. She didn't really succeed in getting the case rate opened until 2004. She thus had a friend who worked for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE. The FDLE is not authorized to look into situations involving missing persons and is not permitted to look into cases at the request of a citizen. However, they are able to get in contact with and involve other law enforcement organizations. After reading the 27-page booklet, they concluded that it was quite strange. They then showed it to other law enforcement agencies, who concurred that the circumstances surrounding Mike's apparent drowning were extremely strange. As a result, they were able to change the case's status from accidental drowning to suspicious missing person, meaning that Cheryl was now being given serious consideration and Mike's case was finally being treated as a criminal case. She lost her granddaughter as a result of everything, even if her son's disappearance was only an accidental drowning, after years of being made fun of for not letting sleeping dogs lie. This was because March's wife Denise refused to have the issue looked into. Her desire was to continue living her life. She was not going to think about it. She had no desire to investigate it further. She's like, how come you're continuing doing this when it's evident he drowned? Additionally, I will not permit you to visit your granddaughter going forward if you persist in your attempts to have the investigation reopened. And that was incredibly difficult for Cheryl. However, she placed a great deal of importance on her son receiving justice. It was the price she had to pay. As soon as the inquiry began, it was clear that things would not be easy because Mike's case had never been handled like a criminal matter, meaning that not a shred of evidence had been kept. Nothing is white, not the car, not the park, nor the hunting outfit. This implied that the locations in which these objects were discovered were never thought of as crime sites. Therefore, no proof was ever gathered from them. And there were no time markers, no forensic proof at all, only their footsteps. All 8 of them, including volunteers, family members, and friends, were free to roam throughout the entire space as they chose. Therefore, gathering any proof from those locations or from those objects was impossible. March's belongings have all long since been given back to his family. Thus, they are unable to obtain any forensic evidence in this particular case. For detectives, this was a very frustrating case. One of them added, quote, "We know we're pounding our heads against a brick wall." According to him, they were attempting to atone for not taking into account the potential that things might not have been as they seemed in the year 2000. According to one of my acquaintances, the crime scene was not at all protected. They made a mistake. Investigators therefore began by questioning my friends and family in the only place they could properly start. Denise responded, "No one in my life would want to harm him when they questioned her. When they questioned my employer, he claimed to be a diligent worker. He was, quote, as clean as they come and an amazing guy." All of Mike's acquaintances made the same statement. He was a really kind man. He was a loving spouse. He had been a loving father. He worked very hard. Furthermore, he didn't know anyone in his life who would wish to hurt him. Regretfully, the inquiry was about to run out of steam. Nothing existed, no leads, no witnesses, no suspects at all. Cheryl, my mother, was using her retirement funds to post billboards around the area while doing all in her power to try to find witnesses, leads, or suspects. She was attempting to get media to cover the topic by contacting them. She was funding newspaper advertisements. These advertisements said, "Quiet, it is more than 5 years since I last saw my son Mark. Could you please read this for a moment and assist me in finding him?" Regretfully, the case has remained unsolved by 2006. Cheryl begins receiving calls from investigators who closed the case in 2007. During the identical year of 27, Nick, Mark's brother, was organizing all of my former possessions that had been given back to the family. And he was going over every gun that Mike had acquired and that my ex-wife, Denise Williams, had given back to them. We discovered there was a missing gun. The handgun had a caliber of .22, and this rifle, which Mark had acquired from his father, was also passed down to Mike. Thus, Nick considered it of utmost importance to retrieve this firearm. When he called Denise to inquire about the rifle, she replied, "I lost it." I even filed an insurance claim for this rifle as though it had been lost. And Nick just wasn't convinced by her. He then went ahead and reported this pistol missing by calling the police directly. You know what? Denise recovered the gun by magic and gave it back to my family after he reported it missing. And since it led them to wonder why she was concealing this pistol, this is sort of a turning moment in the case. Does she have any more secrets to hide? And was Denise hiding anything more from our boy? Thus, Mark possessed 3 $1.75 million life insurance policies prior to his disappearance. Thus, one was valued at $500,001 and contained water, the other was valued at $1 million. And the only person who benefited from any of these policies was Denise. And she attempted to make a claim on them just 19 days after Mike vanished, which she was obviously unable to do as he had already vanished at that time. No one pronounced him dead. She thus filed a petition to have Mike formally declared dead within 6 months of his disappearance, which he was, of course. She was then eligible to make a claim for this life insurance payout. Even worse, just a few months prior to his disappearance, the largest life insurance policy, at $1 million, was really taken out. And it was Brian Winchester, his closest buddy, who persuaded him to buy this life insurance. And after that, after Mike vanished, Brian and Denise did wind up getting married. Additionally, they share a home with Mike and Denise and announced their relationship to the public in 2004. Thus, 4 years following Mike's parents. Mike had been gone for 7 years when the Florida Department of Insurance began investigating this after receiving new information about fraud. Additionally, there is a 5-year statute of limitations on insurance fraud. However, that can be extended to 8 years in certain situations. Since Max's parents, Denise and Brian, had declined to engage with the media, they were under some time pressure to look into this. They wanted no part of the matter whatsoever. However, after this information became available, they made an unusual public statement in which they stated, "We have prayed and hope to find out with certainty what happened to Mike for the past 7 years. We want Mike found more than anybody else does." Brian was hauled in for interrogation and, naturally, to address any allegations of insurance fraud. According to him, all Mike wanted was a larger life insurance policy now that he was a father, and he assisted him in making that happen. In addition, he refuted any allegations that, prior to Mike going missing, he and Denise were having an affair. He said that he was still contentedly married to Kathy at the time, which was December 2000. Additionally, he refuted any allegations linking him and Denise to Mike's abduction, asserting that he was sound asleep in bed with his wife Kathy at the time of the disappearance. At this point, Kathy also confirms. She did admit that their marriage was unhappy at the time, despite what Brian had said, and that she already suspected that Brian and Denise were having an affair while Mike was still living. And this served to strengthen the rumors that Brian and Denise had something to do with March's disappearance. Investigators eventually came to this conclusion, but they were unable to provide any supporting evidence. The credit card and phone records from that era were lost, so they were unable to demonstrate their connection in the disappearance, let alone their relationship with one another back in 2000. Therefore, there was nothing that investigators could do at all. Due to the fact that the statute of limitations had passed and they had to close the case, they were powerless, and the only way they could reopen it would be if fresh data or proof surfaced. Mike's mother, Cheryl, remained unfazed by the conclusion of yet another investigation into his disappearance. She was a real badass woman who would go and picket outside the church that Denise and Brian went to, which was also attended by Denise's father. And she raised a sign that said, "Please help me find my son," and it had Mike's picture on it. She eventually succeeded in getting the Discovery Channel to air a segment on Max's appearance in 2011, but sadly, it did not yield any new leads. Cheryl was extremely dissatisfied with the way the FDLE had been handling the case, so on New Year's Day of 2012, she started writing a letter to the governor every day, requesting that a special prosecutor or another agency be assigned to the case in order to conduct an investigation. And she thought that one agent in particular, Mike Phillips, a friend of Mike's, was impeding the case, according to Denise. Before learning that the governor had not answered any of her 240 letters, she wrote him. It was a huge kick in the gut for Cheryl that the governor's office had just sent the unopened letters to the FDLE of all people, and they just put them in a case file. She went on to say, quote, "They could have punched me in the face and still not have hurt me more. Let's go back to August of 2016. Thus, Mike has been missing for nearly 16 years at this point, and in 2016, Denise and Brian announced their divorce. Due to Brian's sex addiction and the fact that they both cheated on each other frequently, they had been apart for 4 years at this point. Then, Denise got in her car early on August 5th in order to drive to her accounting job. Additionally, while she was seated in her car, she saw a shadowy figure move from the third row of seats into the second row. Before she knew it, her ex-husband was sitting behind her, yelling at her and ordering her to follow his directions or drive wherever he asked. She replied, "No, I'm not going to do that to him. I'll take a seat right here." So he pulled out a semi-automatic pistol, put it to her ribcage and said, drive where I tell you to drive, obey my commands." She was forced to drive as a result, but she disregarded his advice. Rather, she took a car to the CBS parking lot. It resembled an enormous CBS circuit. Many people are in the area and CCTV cameras are recording the parking lot. And she says to him, "This is the only public place where I'm willing to talk to you." He was really agitated, but he was at a loss for what to do. He won't do anything bad to her. With all these people around and on camera, he's going to act recklessly. Thus, they simply begin conversing. After between 45 and an hour of conversation, Brian starts crying. He is very restless. He's telling her that he wants to kill himself, not get a divorce, and that he won't hurt or kill her. And Denise was able to soothe him after between 45 and an hour. She said to him, "Look, can I drive you back to your car if I don't tell the police and I don't report it to the police?" And he concurred. She took him back to his truck, parked not far from her home. After exiting the vehicle, he approached her boot and took out a few items he had brought with him, including a small hammer-like object, a plastic top, and a spray bottle containing bleach. Denise said, "That doesn't look good. He was planning to kill me with that." She told him she wouldn't call the police, but as soon as he got out of the car, she drove directly to them to report what had happened. The police were taken aback by her request for Brian's immediate arrest, as they had been suspecting for the past 16 years that harm Brian was connected to Mike's disappearance. She could not believe that she had just willingly gone to the police without a lawyer, though, as she had refused to speak with them for the previous 16 years. They bring her in to get her statement, and when she asked if a detective named Mike Phillips was there, you remember, the one that March's mother, Cheryl, did not like the officer interacting with Denise, pretended not to know who Mike Phillips is, or that he was investigating Max's parents. This is understandable given that Denise asked if Phillips was going to be present to inquire if she would be questioned about Mike's disappearance while she was there. Regardless, she launched into the account of the abduction that occurred earlier in the day. It was a pretty hot and dry case of armed kidnapping, and with the CCTV footage from the CVS parking lot, it would be pretty easy to convict Brian of armed kidnapping, which has a 10-year minimum time of imprisonment. But the police actually don't really care about her attempted kidnapping. They care about getting some information about Max's parents. They tell Denise that when they bring Brian in for questioning, they're going to ask him about Mike. They know that he killed Mike. They know that he planted the discovery or orchestrated the discovery of the way it is. And Denise is just not having a buyer. She's like, "I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about Mike. As far as I'm aware, he went hunting and then he never came back. I know nothing else I don't want to talk about. I just want to talk about what happened this morning. And, my kidnapping. They even got another officer in who has been investigating Max's parents for a very long time, like since the beginning of the investigation, pretty much." And he tells her, he's like, "Look, I've been looking into Max's parents. I know the ins and outs of this situation. I know every small detail to the point where I have your gate card or your front card to your door memorized. I know everything. I know what happened. And in the whole history of Lake Seminole, there's never been a person that's drawn it, and we haven't found their body. So we know he didn't drown at Lake Seminole." And Denise just adds, "I don't know about that. I don't know about anything. I don't want to talk about it. All I want to talk about is how Brian took me hostage this morning. And I want him to be arrested immediately." This cop then takes it a step further. She says, "All right, so we're going to go arrest Brian. When we do, we're going to question him about Mike's parents. Given that you've had him arrested, what do you think he'll say? What do you suppose he will say regarding his parents?" Furthermore, Denise simply refuses to bite. She says, "I'm not sure. I have no idea what he will say." They also bring up these pornographic images and movies that Brian had allegedly recorded of Denise, his ex-wife Kathy, and himself before Mike vanished while Mike was still living. Furthermore, they are aware of them if they are displaying these images and films as though they have seen them firsthand. Denise simply acts foolish too. She says, "I'm not sure, and you're making me uncomfortable now that I know you mentioned that I would have to view them. I'd rather not discuss this. I want to talk about Brian kidnapping me because I think this woman must be insane or something to think she can get Brian charged with armed kidnapping, which carries a minimum 10-year prison sentence. She believes she can get him arrested for that, but he will just take it passively and won't tell them everything about Mike's murder and disappearance in retaliation. To go to the police and plead for protection from a man she plotted to kill her husband with must be insane. I believe that she believed she was indestructible at this point and could get away with anything because, throughout the previous 16 years, she had gotten away with murdering her husband and committing insurance fraud. I was hoping you could fill in some of the pieces of the puzzle you haven't," the officer even stated to her. Brian may consider what I've said. He stated that clearly, yet she still doesn't understand. Denise, what's not clicking? Thus we ignite. Brian is in court on charges of kidnapping, domestic abuse, and armed burglary, 2 felonies. Denise appeared at the hearing and begged the judge to deny bail so that she and her kid could be protected. The judge granted her request. At his sentencing in December 2017, Brian claimed that his teenage son from his first marriage to Kathy had chosen to move in with her, that he was suicidal on the day of the kidnapping due to the divorce, and that his mother had just received a terminal cancer diagnosis. Thus, he proposed a minimum 10-year sentence. Dennis read aloud from a tearful victim impact statement once more. "Every day begins with the recollection of him jumping out of the rear, and ends with me trying to sleep while feeling like I have a gun pressed against my ribcage. I always shake the back seats of my car as I get in to go to work. This is my current way of living." Ultimately, Brian received a 20-year prison sentence for the kidnapping. Now, as it happens, 2 months earlier, Brian had really struck a bargain with the prosecutors, who had seen that his and Denise's divorce had only been formalized a few months before, as a chance. Thus, they were no longer shielded by the right to spouse. In order to avoid facing life in prison for his kidnapping accusations, Brian struck a deal with them in which they would grant him immunity from all charges pertaining to Mike's death and disappearance provided he told them the whole narrative of what happened to him. Brian then spilled the beans to them. In October 1997, Brian revealed that he and Denise had been having an affair, which occurred nearly 17 years to the day after Mike vanished. Before Mike vanished, they had been having an affair for 3 years behind Mike and Kathy's back. They would get together frequently for sex up to 15 times a week at times. They would also get together at Mike Indonesia's residence. Brian would accompany them on business travels for Mike's job while he was at work. And then he and Denise would get together to spend time together when Mike was out working at conferences or whatever. Even so, Brian sat quietly. "My wife was wonderful, I had a child, and I also had a niece, Denise, who happens to be his best friend's wife." Denise asserted that she was dissatisfied with her marriage to Mike and that, among other things, they weren't having much sex. She also stated that she didn't want to have sex with Mike because she felt he was working too much. And keep in mind that Mike wasn't pleased in the partnership either. And he told Brian, of all people, that he was angry with Denise for not wanting to have sex, and that he hoped they might reignite their passion on that anniversary trip that Mike was never able to go. In addition, he was informing Brian about the frequent disappearance of funds from his bank account. And the reason he was worried about this was that he believed Denise was withdrawing funds from the accounts in order to purchase narcotics. He believed she was abusing drugs. He had no idea, though, that Denise was really taking out the money to pay for hotels and trips she took with Brian. Who is he confiding this to, and why? And while being aware of everything, Brian shows no regret. He stands there, listening to his best friend's account of his marital woes. He's not saying anything, though, even though he knows he's the reason behind it. It's clear that he had no regrets about harming his closest friend in this way. In any case, Denise and Brian had this chat about how she wanted to live with Brian full-time, but that getting a divorce would be against her religious beliefs. She also wished to avoid having to fight for custody of their kid. She was not required to share custody of their child. And I always think it's so crazy to hear that kind of thing in these circumstances because there are so many cases where people are like, well, I don't believe in divorce. It's really unbelievable. I had to wed him as a result. There was nothing else for me to do. They said something like, "What are you saying that your religion believes that divorce is wrong, but that having an affair and getting married are okay?" And then, 16 years later, this woman went and got a divorce, Brian. Thus, I'm not even sure what this is. However, they begin speculating about how they could murder Mike and get away with it, but they end up with nothing. However, one day while Mike and Brian are out hunting, Mike walks into this mod, and this mutt just sucks Mike straight up until Brian manages to get him out. But it required a lot of work, and it made Brian consider the possibility that, had he been left alone, he might have passed away instantly. They then devised the idea that, well, perhaps we could just manufacture an incident similar to that, like a hunting trip mishap, and nobody would ever know. They thus begin to make plans. Mike gets this $1 million life insurance policy from Brian. Additionally, Mike already has 2 life insurance plans, but he says, I'll just let them lapse and not pay for them. He was unaware, nevertheless, that Dennis continued to pay the life insurance policy's premiums in order to receive $1.75 million should they unavoidably kill him. This implied that there was a deadline by which they needed to murder Mike. You know, it wasn't long before he learned that Dennis continued to make life insurance policy payments, and that would raise red flags. Furthermore, she genuinely didn't want to accompany him on their 6-year anniversary trip. She wanted his removal. Thus, they initiated the plan. In order to prevent being connected to one other, Brian and Dennis decided to cut off communication both before and after the murder. Then Brian extended an invitation to his father-in-law and Mike to go hunting early in the morning. After his hunting expedition with Mike, Kathy's dad went hunting so he would have someone to confirm his whereabouts for that morning. On Friday, December 15th, the night before the murder, Brian took his then-wife Kathy out and got her drunk so that she would sleep in and wake up late. Dennis was also going to make a few calls from her home phone while he was out on a hunting trip with Mike in order to prove that she was at home all morning when Mike was getting married. And on December 16th, the following morning, while Kathy was still asleep and the sun had not yet risen, he snuck out of bed and went to a seminar with Mike. He informed him that he would require his waiters and that he was going him to a special hunting location. In order to prevent him from being connected to going hunting with Mike that morning, he also informed him that his phone was dead and that he should not contact him for any reason. Mike put his weight on and then shoved Mike overboard once they emerged onto Lake Seminole on the Barb, Brian having, in the hopes that his White House would fill with water and he would be unable to get off and drown. However, Mike managed to remove his hunting jacket, which he always wears, and he was in the water, yelling for Brian to come to his aid so he could get out. It is heartbreaking to consider that Mike was killed when Brian, acting in a panic, shot him in the head with a 12-caliber shotgun. Mike was in the water, helpless, and he realized right before he died that his best friend with whom he had been buddies since 9th grade was attempting to kill him. He pulled Brown's body out of the water and into the back of his car, realizing that the loss he had suffered was his own. Then he turned around and drove Mike's Bart back into the stump field. After that, he took a car and headed home while taking apart and discarding his shotgun through the window, and Kathy was still asleep when he arrived home. Thus, he curled up on her bedside and feigned to have overslept, skipping their hunting excursion with her father-in-law. In addition, he called his father-in-law to apologize for oversleeping. The hunting excursion would not be possible for him. In this manner, he also possessed phone records attesting to his being at home that morning. He continues to drive with Mike's body in the back of the vehicle. He went to Walmart later that morning, picked up a shovel and a top, and drove to a lake that was perhaps 10 or 16 kilometers away from his residence. And he laid Mike to rest in a little grave. Shortly afterward, his father called to inform him that Mike had vanished and they needed to go look for him, and he proceeded to assist in the hunt for his recently married friend. Brian argues that Denise never asked and that he never fully disclosed to her the details of what transpired that day. He added that they both swore they would never tell anyone else. After waiting for a time for Brian to divorce Kathy, his ex-wife, they finally came clean about their relationship in 2004. They pretended it was something new and exciting, but in actuality they had been dating since 1997. When their personal relationship began to fail in 2012, they both developed a growing paranoia that the other would disclose the incident to others or talk about it. They got to the stage where they wanted to give each other a pat before they discussed anything important. And then, when Denise eventually filed for divorce in 2016, Brian tried to abduct her and broke into her car because he was so afraid she would talk. The rest of that tale is well known to you. Following his confession, Brian led authorities to the spot where he had interred Mike's body, though he was unable to recall the precise location. Thus, for 5 days, investigators dug holes in the region that were 9 feet 2.7 meters deep, 16 hours a day. After a while, they were able to find Mike's body with the aid of cadaver dogs, and they were also able to retrieve part of his clothing, including his winter boots and gloves, in addition to 98% of his burns. Consequently, in October 2017, Brian made this confession, and in December 2017 he was sentenced. Denise sparked during his sentence, stating that she was unaware of any of this. She was unaware that he had confessed, and that by now the police had located Mike's body. Simply put, they didn't want Denise to become suspicious since they weren't yet ready to take her into custody, so they withheld all of this information from the public. At this point, there was still insufficient evidence against her to result in a conviction. Brian's confession was all they had, yet it was insufficient. They therefore got in touch with Kathy, Brian's ex-wife, in an attempt to obtain further proof against Denise. She also happens to be very close friends with Denise, which amazes me because she is aware that Denise had an affair with her husband when they were still married before getting married. Because I was unable to, Kathy is a greater woman than I was. In any case, Kathy was contacted by the police and asked if she could assist them with the investigation. She replies that the day after Denise left the sheriff's office, she had called her and told Marcus to notify Brian about the kidnapping. I'm not talking about Marcus being Brian's father, which was the real fantasy this lady had, that she would go to police and accuse him of armed abduction, try to get him sentenced to at least 10 years in jail, and then send him a message saying, "I'm not talking about my father." To be honest, I have no idea what this woman is on. Nevertheless, Kathy tries to get her to, once she begins walking with the police, after she has been laid off for some time, to go on a taped phone call that the police are recording in order to get Denise to say anything along these lines. She also informs her that she has been summoned in connection with Brian's accusations. She was also concerned that they might bring up Mike's abduction. Brian informed me that it was his idea. And what is it? Oh my God. Later that afternoon, Marcus showed up to the shop and told me that this would ruin my life, and that I would have to take it with me to the grave. It seems that after telling Marcus that he had spoken to me, Brian simply told me. Marcus continued by explaining to me how ruining Stafford Floyd would ruin my life and prevent me from ever being able to start over if this were the case. Marcus knew it. During this phone call, Denise makes no admissions. However, she does question Marcus whether he knew when he is confronted with her involvement with Max's parents. She concurred with Kathy when she mentioned telling Marcus to inform Brian. I'm silent. Additionally, she is extremely composed throughout, which is extremely unusual for an innocent person to do when facing murder charges. She does, therefore, hint to something throughout this phone call, even though she doesn't explicitly acknowledge to it. And investigators find that satisfactory enough. It so happened that Denise and Mike's daughter turned 19 on May 8, 2016. 48-year-old niece was arrested for first-degree murder, accessory after the fact, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder outside her workplace. She entered a not guilty plea to every allegation, and her trial started in late 2018. Brian was a well-known witness during the trial, and the defense once attempted to claim that he was simply infatuated with Denise. Thus, he completed the task without his knowledge. He sat silently after that. My best friend was Denise. We were Clyde and Bonnie. While we were infatuated with one another, we were partners in crime. You could say that Denise was found guilty on all counts in December 2018, which is nearly 18 years to the day after Mike was killed. Additionally, my mother Cheryl delivered a moving victim impact statement during her sentence hearing. In an effort to locate the missing, I would go out and post notices. I took a bold stance. I asked everyone I came across in Lincoln County to assist me in finding Wyatt. In an effort to locate my son and stop Tallahassee Democrats, I penned thousands of emails to lawmakers and the media. I even put up billboards in an attempt to locate Mark. I was really moved by her statement since it's obvious how hurt she is. Because Denise was unable to simply file for divorce, she battled for her son's justice for 18 years after he was dead. That was all there was to it. How much that wore her down over the years is beyond me. I can't even begin to picture how relieved she was when her years of tireless advocacy paid off and she was able to see justice for her kid. She persisted without giving up. Therefore, the reason Denise and Brian are serving a maximum order of imprisonment is entirely her fault. It's unfortunate that no one paid attention to her for such a long time. For the next 18 years, Denise and Brian were free to enjoy their lives. Mike was never given the chance, but Denise was given a life sentence. In 2020, she filed an appeal, arguing that there was insufficient evidence linking her to Mike's murder. In actuality, the judge upheld Denise's conviction for conspiracy to commit murder but not for first-degree murder or accessory after the fact. Thus, she was still serving a 3-year sentence. She so challenged that sentence as well, and in September 2021, a hearing was held. During the sentence hearing, Denise's daughter really spoke and essentially stated that Denise was unrelated to her father's situation. It was all Brian's fault, claiming that he physically abused Denise and never sought advice from her on anything. She also requested that Denise receive the minimum 2-year sentence from the judge. But Cheryl insisted on the maximum penalty being applied, saying, quote, "I will believe justice has been served for my son only if you will make Denise sob every minute of her 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder." Ultimately, the judge resentenced Denise to a full 3 years, which included the time she had already spent during the February 2019 sentencing hearing. "Not only did Denise kill my son, but she also snatched my granddaughter for the rest of her life," my mother Cheryl said to the judge. "My granddaughter was not allowed to experience the love of her father's family and was reared in a home where her father's killers lived. They told her that her grandmother was insane and would harm her. No amount of incarceration could make Mike come back to me. Because of the harm her mother has caused, I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to have my granddaughter back in my life." After a period of 5 months, Denise's daughter received all of Mike's possessions along with the remaining insurance funds that were due to Denise. And in order to spare herself from prosecution on 3 charges of insurance fraud, Denise signed all of this over to her. As per the agreement, her daughter would either keep the $150,000 or forfeit it if she violated the restriction on using the funds for Denise's legal expenses. Brian is currently incarcerated at the Wakulla Correctional Institution, while Denise is housed at the Florida Women's Reception Center. Since then, Brian's mother Cheryl has received his bones from Mark and Denise's daughter so that she can be buried in a respectable manner. "I want everyone to come who loved Michael," she said, inviting all of Mike and Denise's friends and relatives to the burial. On the 20th anniversary of her death, she also arranged a memorial ceremony for everyone who had assisted in bringing Mike's killers to justice. However, that is all there is to it. That concludes the matter at hand. I'll end it here for today. When I was doing my study, I genuinely believed that Denise was a crazy person. Denise is a crazy person even more than Brian is. She is misguided. All she could think to get away with was that. She felt as though she could walk on water. Fortunately, my son Cheryl arrived to rescue the day. She seems to be mocked for 18 years by individuals who were just willing to let it go. Like, you just drowned clearly. All you have to do is let go of it and carry on with your life. And thank heavens she resisted those people's advances, for without her intervention, this matter would likely never have been resolved. Additionally, I was unable to uncover any information online regarding Cheryl's ability to get in touch with her grandchild. But it's just so tragic that since Denise is a crazy person and chose to kill her husband, she was prevented from having this bond with her granddaughter and her lost connection to her son, Mike. Additionally, Denise was genuinely crazy when she was convicted for the first time. She just sat there without showing any emotion and looked straight ahead, much like the girl's father.